Group, you have the floor.
Kiitos puhemies. Dear colleagues, High Representative, your consultations in Moscow must serve as an eye-opener for all those who had illusions about the real character and policies of the Kremlin. The visit as such, but especially the infamous press conference, sparked outrage among many of my colleagues in the EPP group, and you will hear it later. The behaviour of Foreign Minister Lavrov was unfriendly, uncooperative and unacceptable. We duly noted that you put forward several points of our concern, the demand for the release of Alexei Navalny and the 10,000 arrested citizens, the Russian aggression in states of our immediate neighbourhood. But was it not to be expected that Lavrov would produce an attack on the EU? It would have been appropriate to address the long list of Russian misbehaviour in response and to rebuff Lavrov's whataboutism on Latvia, Cuba and Catalonia. Russia is the aggressor in Ukraine and elsewhere, not us. Russian authorities have people murdered at home and abroad, not us. Russia secures dictators in power, not us. Things are now crystal clear. No more wishful thinking, no more appeasement. This Russian leadership does not seek dialogue, even less so before the Duma elections. These Russian leaders are adversaries of the EU and want to divide us. We Europeans must now act together and defend our values and interests. We demand a clear message of unity and determination from the Council and our leaders. We expect Member States to make use of the European Magnitsky Act. You said you will initiate it. Thank you very much. Let every judge and prosecutor playing their role in political trials against opposition and peaceful demonstrators feel they have booked a place on our sanctions list. And then grill the big fish, the profiteers and big supporters of the regime. Let them feel the same. No more trips to the EU, asset freeze, real anti-money laundering action in all of our member states. In parallel, let us step up support and dialogue with civil society. Our interest in cooperation was genuine, so must now be our resolve. Thank you very much.
Kiitokset kollega Gahler.
Thank you, Mr. Gahler. Now for the S&D Group, Kati Piri from The Hague. You have the floor.
Minuuttia, olkaa hyvä.
Thank you, President. What we witnessed in the case of Navalny is Kafka year 2021. After having failed to kill him, he had to be put away. Navalny is seen as a threat because he puts his finger on the sore spot. Russians have enough of Putin's kleptocracy while ordinary people face economic hardships. Moscow abused the visit of High Representative Borrell to humiliate and offend the European Union. It expelled 3 diplomats during his visit, and Lavrov called the EU an unreliable partner, while Russia is doing everything to divide us. But to put the blame on Borrell for this, would it have also happened if the EU leaders would have taken a tougher stance? But instead, the Council so far failed to put any meaningful sanctions on Russia after the assassination attempt of Navalny. Orban prevented the EU from issuing a joint statement. The Cypriot government has been issuing golden passports to Kremlin enablers for years. French President Macron just recently renewed his call for a dialogue with Moscow, and last Saturday, Moscow resumed work on Nord Stream 2 with the support of German Chancellor Merkel. Colleagues, what we need is a united strategy on Russia, not an appeasement in view of the challenges Russia is posing to our security. This means that the Council will have to come with clear and tough sanctions against Putin and his enablers, and I believe Mr. Borrell has drawn the same conclusions. Thank you.
Kiitokset kollega Piri.
Thank you very much, Ms. Piri. Now for the Renew Group, Mr. Dacian Cioloș.
Minuuttia.
2 minutes.
President, High Representative, your visit to Moscow at this moment was, in my opinion, a mistake. Proper attention wasn't paid to the fact that there was no room to act to put on pressure for Navalny to be liberated from prison. Of course, we want to maintain diplomatic channels open, and I won't deny that. But an official visit to Russia, given the backdrop, given the tensions, takes on a symbolic value. We believe this visit has sent out the wrong diplomatic message. Consistency with the strong message that the European Union is sending out towards Russia is important for democracy, both in Russia and in the whole of the Eastern Partnership. You fell into a media trap in Moscow, one created by the Putin regime. 2 days after Navalny's arrest and after the protests that we saw in the streets, Moscow has violated international law and the rights of its own citizens. There was an illegal annexation of Crimea. There have been cyber attacks against us. They've carried out assassinations on EU territory. It's launched a disinformation campaign against Europe. There are other ways for the External Action Service to act. It didn't make sense to carry out a visit given the conditions. Our visits have to be properly organised. Otherwise, as we know, Russia isn't interested in constructive relations with the EU. We want to create solid, credible relations, one which will have a proper influence. And the visit to Moscow and the consequences and fallout from it have sadly had a negative impact on the credibility of the EU in the diplomatic sector. Sadly, I think we all have to learn a lesson from what happened.
Kiitokset kollega Ciolos.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cholos. Next, for the ID group, Mr. Thierry Mariani, 2 minutes.
Monsieur le Haut Représentant.
High Representative, intellectually, we come from different political families. In this hemicycle, I've always pointed out that I didn't agree with all of your initiatives, but I want to pay tribute. Your trip to Moscow was realistic, necessary and courageous. Yes, I'm one of those who thinks that the EU cannot have no diplomacy. You said it yourself. All of your allies were against you, even though your diplomatic trip had not yet come to an end. And Atlanticism, people want to go back to the Cold War. All of that stops the EU from adopting a realistic policy today. So it's unlikely that you will be successful. Russia is constantly insulted by the European institutions, and that's no gift for you. That's why it was so necessary to take this risk and to go to Moscow and to speak to our Russian partners. That was why we had to end hypocrisy. If we look to the Atlantic, we also have to look to the east, including as far as the Urals, as Charles de Gaulle said. We aren't naive. We know that Russia will continue to pursue its interests. We should stop representing other countries in our relations with Russia. It's about independence and dignity. If we say things simply, it means that we shouldn't make ourselves a laughingstock while giving lessons to the rest of the world while reaching out a hand to Turkey. Germany knows what's happening with Russia because of Nord Stream. Europe is understanding this because we understand that the Sputnik vaccine may soon be necessary. Joe Biden said that America is back when he was sworn into office. We should say to that Europe is free.
Kiitokset edustaja Mariani.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mariani. Sorry. No heckling from the floor, please. And now, on behalf of the Green EFA group, Sergey Lagodinsky, 1.5 minutes.
In
politics, as with diplomacy, personal experience is invaluable. You, Mr. Borrell, in recent days have had special personal experience Luckily, these experiences were not comparable with the experiences of many Russian citizens who have been gathering their experience. Yes, Mr. Mariani, we are looking to Russia all the way to Vladivostok. Who do we see there? We see people who are being arrested, who are being beaten. People like Kitaeva, who's a female activist, who was stifled by with a plastic bag until she gave her PIN number for her phone number. A man who was kicked in such a way that when he requested to complain to the police, he was kicked some more until he retracted the complaint. So your visit, Mr. Borrell, I think was sobering for you, but for us as well, and for member states, for Berlin, for Paris, for the national governments upon whose mandate you travel to Russia. So now it's high time that we go there and draw the conclusions. That's where the conclusions must be drawn. We have to stop trying to cooperate with Putin in some way. The travesty of Gerhard Schröder. We have to make more offensive attacks on Russia. We have to think about sanctions. And yes, we have to think about stopping Nord Stream 2. I'm not just saying that to you, not really to you, but actually to Berlin and to Paris, because that's where the people who are responsible for this are.
Kiitokset, kollega.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lagodinsky. The next speaker on behalf of the ECR, Anna Fotyga. She will be speaking from Warsaw.
President, Mr. Borrell, I reiterate my position delivered to you before this unfortunate visit. I maintain this position, of course. Your decision, actually under influence of major member states, Markus Ederer, considered to be a so-called Russia understanding politician, and advisors within the Council and the Commission, you decided to go there and was led to a trap carefully prepared by Sergey Lavrov. You decided to do this against advice of countries of my region and politicians in the European Parliament over political divisions. By this trip, you actually strengthened the regime in the run-up to parliamentary election, and you denied a trace of hope for heavily fighting Russian opposition. You communicated your strong messages eye to eye, allowing Lavrov to deliver his lies and arrogance to millions of people all over the world, also seeing your humiliation in this effect. We know that you achieved something that is to boost your personal position, because your personal position in attempts to reinvigorate JCPOA is well known. In this course of events, you decided to consult with Moscow rather than US, and during this endeavor, you allowed Lavrov to actually offend our allies and our friends like Ukraine and others. It was really bad mistake. You have to
Kiitos
really
kollega Fotyga, teidän puheaikanne on nyt käytetty ja vähän enemmänkin. Ja nyt sitten annan puheenvuoron.
Thank you very much. Now for the left. Ms. Daly for 1 minute.
And listening to the relentless Russia-phobia in this place, why are people surprised that Russia sees no point in engaging with the EU? I'm as happy as anybody else to stand up for anybody's rights, including Navalny's. But let's be honest about him. He's a vicious, anti-immigrant racist on maybe 4% of the support, in rallying hundreds and thousands in cities of millions, hardly a mass movement. And we wouldn't be discussing him at all if he'd been arrested anywhere else other than in Russia. Meanwhile, Julian Assange has been incarcerated for almost 10 years for exposing US war crimes. We can't mention his name. Tomorrow, Pablo Hasél, a Catalan rapper, is going to prison for his lyrics. Where's the call to sanction Spain? Tomorrow, 62-year-old Claire Grady is going to prison in West Virginia for her role in the non-violent ploughshare action against Trident. Where's the demand to break off links with the US? Or the outcry about the hundreds of people arrested in this city on a protest a week ago? Nowhere, because this isn't about human rights. This is a geopolitical agenda against Russia, fuelled by a military-industrial complex who need an enemy to justify their millions. Of course you're right to go to Russia. We should be engaged in dialogue, not war.
Saisinko pyytää, että pysymme täällä kuitenkin rauhassa?
Thank you very much. Can everyone remain calm, though? It's extremely important that other speakers are respected. I now give the floor to Mr. Puigdemont from the non-attached. You have 1 minute.
Thank you, Chair. You, Mr. Borrell, should have told Minister Lavrov that he's wrong. That Spain does not have 3 political prisoners, but has 9. That it cannot be compared to Navalny because he has been sentenced to 3 years and a half in prison, and the Catalan leaders have been sentenced from 9 to 13 years in prison for organising a referendum. We have warned that the double standard applied by the EU undermines its global credibility as a defender of freedoms. There are no humiliating consequences for all. The EU cannot go around the world recommending receipts that does not apply to itself. I want a Europe with a strong voice for human rights and without complexes, in front of anyone, not only in front of Russia, not only in front of the United States, China, Morocco or Turkey, but with anyone. You are not that voice, Mr. Borrell. Mr. Borrell, please do a Borrell exit. Thank you very much.
Kiitos kollega Puigdemont. Ja nyt...
Thank you, Mr. Puigdemont. Then we have further MEPs. Next we have Mr. Sikorski. You have 2 minutes and you're speaking from Warsaw. Over to you, sir.
Madam President, colleagues, High Representative, let's remember that the main blame for the fiasco of this visit is on Russia. It is Russia that was rude and perfidious towards our High Representative. But nevertheless, this visit was a mistake. This was predictable and it was predicted, and you didn't go with the full support of all the member states. And if you wanted to hear what you heard from Mr. Lavrov, you could have met him on the margins of OSCE or the UN, where the environment would not have been controlled by the Russians. They just obviously can't help but show their bad manners towards Western representatives. We are not supplicants of Russia. It is Russia that needs the lifting of our sanctions. And while Russia is still occupying the territory of its neighbors, while it's murdering people in our streets, while it's interfering in our political processes, and above all, while it's repressing its own people, this was not a good time to go. We need a sign from Russia that they are willing to change their policy. And then, of course, we should always show them the so-called off-ramp towards, away from authoritarianism. But I hope that this experience has inspired you for better understanding of us in Central Europe, and I'm counting on you to support sanctions against Russia while their bad behaviour continues. Thank you.
Kiitokset, kollega.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sikorski. I now give the floor to Mr. Pichula. 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. High Representative. Human rights situation in Russia is deteriorating at unprecedented scale. Thousands of peaceful protesters are being detained and their right to demonstrate is being suppressed without valid legal arguments. Large-scale, countrywide demonstrations create internal problems that are always easiest to externalise. As we witnessed last week, Russia is not open towards hearing the facts being raised directly, neither by their citizens nor by foreign representatives. It's easy to conclude that our relations with Russia are at a very low point. We should put in use additional targeted sanctions measures through a global human rights sanction mechanism and continue seeking for options on how to assist better civil society organisations. Finally, we have to adopt a new, substantial and comprehensive strategy towards Russia. While working on it, the EU should not keep falling into political traps, further narrowing space for our political actions, but rather strengthen common foreign and security policy. Energy overdependence, divergent strategies of the member states towards vaccine, Russia's very active role with disinformation campaigns and support to anti-European forces should be on our to-do list for the next Council meeting. Prevailing particular interests are only a great opportunity for Russia to impose further leverage. We should re-examine and put an end to the ongoing projects that undermine the credibility of the European Union as a whole. Thank you.
Kiitokset, kollega.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pichula. The next speaker on the list is Mr. Guetta for 1.5 minutes and is speaking to us from Paris.
Thank you, Madam President. With just an ounce of intelligence, he could have understood the message that the very visit of Josep Borrell brought with it. With an ounce of finesse or lucidity, he could have understood that obviously we condemn in no uncertain terms, and we continue to condemn the judicial harassment that's been inflicted on Alexei Navalny and the arrest of protesters that support him. But nevertheless, we still want to keep our bridges open with Russia, especially on Iran. There's nothing more legitimate or easy to understand than that position. But what Mr. Putin understood is that he needs to behave like a little playground bully to demand to the world and to the rest of Russia that he's not scared of us. But I'm sorry, Mr. Putin, you failed. In behaving in such a way, you've merely shown that your panic, which now blinds you because the Russian opposition has found its figurehead, because you're losing a footing in the states that left your ancient empire, and because your popularity is waning and your coffers are emptying. Because of this tete-a-tete with China that nobody wanted because of your blindness. Nobody wanted that. None of the rich, the oligarchs, the security forces, the middle classes. You're losing control, Mr. Putin, and while you're at the end of your reign may be long and painful, it has begun. You opened it yourself with your obvious panic.
Kiitos, kollega Getta.
Thank you very much, Mr. Guetta. Now, the next speaker on the list is Mr. Deman for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you, President. The EU High Representative wanted to teach the Russians a lesson, but it was a barren visit. Mr. Lavrov quite simply knew that the EU didn't have the possibility to meddle in the internal affairs of Russia, and there is a principle that this is not how diplomatic relations can work. Well, it was a bit embarrassing, but moreover, Mr. Borrell and the Spanish socialists refused to see the situation as it is in terms of arresting protesters. There was a clear niet from President Putin, who has been elected with 76% of the electorate, more than any other head of state or government can claim in the EU. In the meantime, in the same EU, you have Catalan politicians who are thrown in prison. They're not even allowed to take their seat in Parliament here, having been elected, and that with the agreement of the President of this Parliament, who also happens to be a socialist. When it comes to the principle of the right to assemble, right to demonstrate, in my country, last week, 500 people were arrested because they were protesting against the prevention of allowing people freedom with the pretext of corona. There's violence being used against innocent protesters who are fighting for their rights. I would say, colleagues, Mr. Borrell, sort out your own garden before you start waving a moraling finger at somebody else.
Kiitos, kollega Deman. Ja nyt sitten...
Thank you, Mr. Deman. The next speaker is MEP Grigorova from Prague. 1 minute.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Borrell, I don't have questions for you that you won't answer me anymore. Instead, I want to speak about what is important right now. The thousands of Russians in the streets being beaten and detained, and many more of them that don't want a corrupted government and hoped for support from the international community. With your ill-executed visit, you not only ashamed the European citizens, you also helped Putin and harmed the Russian people. You provided a mafia state with more images and sound bites to make us look weak and corrupt and make the Kremlin's regime look legitimate. You also failed to visit Navalny or at least support him during his trial, a missed opportunity to back up EU's strong claims about this case and to bring at least a little dignity to this visit. For this public damage, you should step down from your post immediately.
Kiitokset, kollega.
Thank you very much, Ms. Grigorova. The next speaker is MEP Zlotowski for 2 minutes, please.
Kiitos. Signor Commissionario, naiwność w relacji...
I would have preferred that your visit to Russia was due to your lack of experience, but not a conviction that you can persuade Putin to do anything. We knew that this visit would harm our policy of sanctions, which wasn't perfect, but at least it was decisive and considered. Now, you have destroyed this policy. Despite of all the atrocities and violations, it seems that we are ready to normalize our relations with Russia. Did you talk to Minister Lavrov on cooperation on cybersecurity at the moment when Russian hackers are attacking us every month? In the past, Mikołajczyk, Polish Prime Minister, was also treated similarly, but at least he delayed an attack on Poland. At the time when you were seeing Lavrov, 3 European Union diplomats were expelled.
Ja seuraava puhuja on kollega
Thank you very much, Mr. Zlotowski. Now, Ms. Modig.
Arvoisa korkea edustaja Borrelli.
Thank you, Chair. The free opposition, free civil society don't exist in Russia. This visit has unfortunately shown what is happening with political leadership in that country. There's a slip towards authoritarianism. But we must seek out dialogue. We must fight for human rights. It doesn't matter who the partner is. There's no doubt about that. But we must also fight for the freeing of Navalny and support the opposition. The Russians must be able to choose their leadership freely and fairly. Basic fundamental rights need to be upheld. That's why we have charters and treaties. There can be no other political direction. We have to always fight for human rights, whatever the circumstances.
Kiitos, kollega Modig.
Thank you very much, Ms. Modig. The next speaker is MEP Rokmaka. 1 minute.
Dear Mr. Borrell, dear colleagues, opposition leader Navalny shows immense courage, testing the waning leadership of Putin. This brave man and the entire opposition need our full support. Mr. Borrell, on the other hand, made a fool of himself last week in Moscow. By his actions, he made a mockery of the ambition of the EU to play a major role on the world stage. His actions are, I'm sorry to say, in line with several recent ill-considered actions of the Commission. However, let us remember, we are able to criticise our political leaders freely, a right that every human has, but in many countries is trampled on by so-called political leaders and tyrants. Mr. Navalny is on a mission. He should have our support. The unfortunate actions of Mr. Borrell must not distract us from the principle that is at stake here, freedom. Thank you.
Kiitos, kollega Rokmaker. Ja nyt haluan...
Thank you, MEP Rokmaker. The next on the list is Paolo Rangel for 2 minutes.
Madam President, Mr. High Commissioner, High Representative, we strongly condemn the decision to prosecute Alexei Navalny. We strongly condemn the attempt to murder Navalny. We strongly condemn the repression of demonstrations that took place all across the territory of Russia. We strongly condemn the unacceptable expulsion of 3 European Union diplomats. And we strongly condemn the cynical attitude of Foreign Minister Lavrov. We praise the courage and the resilience of the Russian people, of the Russian opposition, of the Russian civil society. We praise in particular the courage of Alexei Navalny, of his family, of his supporters. High Representative Mr. Josep Borrell, because we strongly condemn Russian authorities' behaviour and their authoritarian regime, because we praise the extraordinary bravery of the Russian people and oppositionists, we deeply regret your vision and your actions in such an important, decisive and sensitive file. We deeply regret your decision to go to Moscow. We deeply regret your unfortunate and condescending declarations. We deeply regret that you did not have the courage to face eye to eye Mr. Lavrov's unacceptable stance. Mr. Borrell, don't get us wrong. The European Union peoples and this House, the European Parliament, will never give up. We will be always on the side of the Russian people's aspiration for freedom and democracy. For some reason, our human rights prize is Sakharov Prize. We shall never surrender.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rangel. The next speaker on the list is Mr. Sanchez Amor for 1 minute.
President, Mr. Borrell. We're talking more about Mr. Borrell than we are about Russia, which I'm sure the Kremlin will be very happy about. The letter asking for Mr. Borrell to stand down is a success for Putin, and so its author should think about that. We have to be realistic. We have to remember our values and those of Navalny. We are a mature European democracy, and we have to use the correct tools of power, both when it comes, including when it comes to difficult situations like this one. We have to think about our response, but we also can't repeat the same mistakes, which would just feed into what Russia wants. When the EU had problems with AstraZeneca, we showed strength and unity. We have to be careful, because otherwise we can't allow other pharmaceuticals, and we can't allow this to damage the image of the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sanchez Amor. The next speaker on the list is Ms. Woutmans for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Mr. Borrell, do you know how a beer is tamed? Once you try, you better be prepared. By bringing a pot of honey and a big stick. Because the moment the beer senses that you're not in control, he attacks. If you're lucky, the beer only hurts you badly. But often, their attacks are lethal. Last Friday, the Russian beer has badly roughed you up. Your disastrous visit to Moscow has damaged you personally. But even worse is the damage done to the EU as a whole. We have never looked so weak and clueless about how to deal with Russia. I even fear that our relations with Russia are worse than before your visit, and that's not good. There are colleagues in this House who want to finish the bear's job and send you home. I don't think you must step down. But today, it's clear that the Parliament is giving you a yellow card. Let this humiliating experience be a lesson. We must agree, colleagues, on a clear strategy on how to engage with Russia. A strategy supported by both the Council and this Parliament. So that next time, Mr. Borrell, you are prepared and have a real chance to tame the beer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Woutmans. The next speaker on the list is Gunnar Beck for 2 minutes.
Vielen Dank, Frau Präsidentin.
Thank you, Chair. No plenary in this House without praise for rule of law in the EU and complaints against shortcomings in the rest of the world. Today, Russia is in the dock because of Navalny. We know that. There is money laundering in Russia. There is violation of Navalny's probation. And what has been put forward is justified, even though harsh and politically opportune. The US is dealing with Edward Snowden in a much different way. The EU is breaking its own treaties and has done so since 2012 and does it even today because the Parliament has just done that by taking on $750 billion of debt. Peaceful demonstrations have, however, been clamped down on in Russia. We don't welcome that. But these are things we see in the EU too. We've seen it in France against the yellow jackets, the gilets jaunes. It would be helpful if the EU would look at its own shortcomings in the rule of law instead of pointing the finger and moralising. The EU is not the best in every category and is not free of its own evils. As Voltaire said, everyone should look at themselves first before looking at others. Thank you very much, Mr. Beck. The next speaker on the list is Mr. Bütikofer. He is speaking to us from Berlin for 1 minute.
Colleagues, Mr. Borrell, I really regret having to listen to colleagues in this House from the extreme right and the extreme left that show more understanding for the dictatorship of Putin than for our own democracy. This, I must say, as the first sentence. Your visit to Moscow, Mr. Borrell, was the very opposite of a success. It was a failure. But it is also true that you had been dealt a very bad hand because of the lack of unity in the Council. Russia played foul, so let's stand up to them. I do object to those that now call for your resignation. The dire situation in the EU-Russia relations has deeper roots. Let's not fall into a trap. Your words today, Mr. Borrell, were strong and severe. I hope they will resonate in Berlin and Paris in particular. But you must fight to turn words into deeds, and you will have us as allies. Thank you.
Kiitos, kollega Bütikofer.
Thank you, Mr. Bütikofer. Now we have Charlie Reimers for 1 minute.
Presidente, High Representative Borrell. In Moscow, Lavrov checkmated you in 4 moves. You compromised your credibility, damaged your office, and undermined the foreign and security interests of member states. You did not threaten sanctions or harshly condemn the arrest of Navalny, nor did you censure the aggression in the Ukraine or denounce Russia when they declared our diplomats persona non grata. As a Swede and a Northerner, I ask myself, where does this unassertiveness come from? Is it from sheer lack of experience? Is it that Western and Southern trade and gas contracts trump Northern and Eastern security interests? Please answer this. Because for us in the North, this highlights the danger in transferring power over foreign policy to Brussels by abolishing national vetoes. Those that hope that the EU will have their back surely do so in vain. High Representative Borrell, you should resign. We need someone who can play in the grand tournaments. Thank you.
Kiitos, kollega Weimers.
Thank you, Mr. Weimers. Now, Traian Băsescu for 1.5 minutes.